And then we will go ahead and work on importing our PM 2.5 file into the toolbox. Our PM 2.5 data file, let's look at it. Here is our PM 2.5 file. So it's a spreadsheet file, and you can tell it's a spreadsheet file because it says the extension of XLSX. And let's take a look at it. Let's open it up just to refresh our memories of how this file looks. And now we are going to click on this Import Spreadsheet button, and that brings up the same navigation screen where you want to navigate to your PM 2.5 data. It's already set up as the Toolbox import file since I just did import, and it goes to the last folder that I've imported from. So Toolbox import files is correct, and this is the correct file. So I click on it, and I select Open, and it says Import Successful. And now we're going to look at it in the Data Import Table button. And again, this does not look very different than my import file. I'm just going to scroll through and make sure there's nothing strange about the file. And I'm also going to check that the number of records matches what's in my database logbook for this file. And 334 matches what's in my logbook, so I am good to go. So I can close this window, and we can move on to the next form in the series where we are going to transfer the data into the verification table. So again, the first thing we want to do is we want to select the site and the sampler. So my PM 2.5 sampler is located at S98, and here it is. And now we want to set up the transfer to the verification table. So remember, this is the column or the field mapping step. So let's click on that. And it's a blank query. Remember that what I said. So if this happened to be another ozone file, this would already be filled in. But since it's a PM 2.5 import and we haven't done that yet in the toolbox, it's blank. So you'll notice there's a lot of fields in my data import table. And a lot of these fields, I don't even know what they are. And I don't need to import all of those fields in the verification table. By a minimum, all you need to import into the verification table is a date, a time, and a concentration. So I'm going to do that. In this particular file, remember, it's serial date format, and serial date is kind of special because if it's serial date, it needs to be mapped to a different field, and it also needs a year. So that's why this year is here. So I need to get the year, the serial date, the time, and the concentration columns into the data verification table. So since I only need 4 of these, I don't want to drag everything down here. But the easy way to do it is I can just double click on each of these and get them into this query design grid. So if I double click on year, that just brings it into the query design grid easily. So I'm going to do the same thing for serial date, time, and concentration. And now what you'll notice is the append to row is blank for serial date, time, and concentration. So I need to tell the toolbox where to map these fields. It guessed for my year field, and I just want to confirm that the year actually does contain the year. So I'm going to look at that just to confirm that year is year, because you don't know. I mean, it made this guess based on the field name only, so I just want to make sure that it guessed correctly, and it did. These are just years. Serial date. We need to do an append to, so we click on the append to row, and we click on the drop down, and we need to select Julian date. This is all in the SOP. So the reason I know this is because it's in the SOP. So if there's any questions on how to map your data correctly, check in the SOP because it tells you all of this. So it tells you that for serial date, you need to map to Julian date. And then time. In my particular case, my times are kind of funky. Like if you look at them, it's not really in common time format. There's no colon in the times. So the toolbox is going to get tripped up on that. So we need to map to the hour field and not the time field. So instead of time here, we need to select hour. And then for concentration, that's pretty easy. We just select concentration. And then we save. Because we've got all of the append to rows filled in. We go ahead and save by clicking on the icon that looks like a little floppy disk. And then we can close this query by clicking on the lower X. And now, since we've done the mapping step, we need to do the copying step. So we click on the transfer to data verification from data import. And yes, I want to run an append query, and 334 rows matches what's in my database logbook. So I say yes. And let's take a look at it. So again, remember I mapped to 4 fields, the year, Julian date, hour, and concentration. And those are the fields that are currently filled in the verification table. I scroll through, make sure nothing weird. Everything looks good so far. Let's scroll to the very bottom. Everything looks good. Let's close. Click on the lower X. And now we click on Update Site and Sampler ID. Say yes, we're going to run an update query, 334 rows, yes. And we're going to view the dates and time. So now look what the toolbox did. The toolbox converted the Julian date to the actual date, and it added colons to my time. So the toolbox did some work on my data and made it look like more common date and time formats. I look at my database logbook and make sure my dates match. So my start date is 1/5/15 and my start time is 8 o'clock. And I scroll to the bottom, and 1/19 at 7 o'clock matches what's in my database logbook. So I can close this screen by clicking on the lower X. And we go down to the potential date and time correction, which is the sampling end time, start time. My PM 2.5 sampler logs the start time. So I don't need to do this sampling end time, start time correction, because for PM 2.5, my sampler logs the start time instead of the end time. So I write down in my database logbook that I don't need to do step J for PM 2.5 data. So I can go ahead and move on. And also I should mention that just because I'm saying I don't have to do it for my PM 2.5 data doesn't mean that you don't have to do it for your PM 2.5 data. That's something you need to investigate on your own and look at your manual and determine what times are being logged. It's just in this particular example, I'm not going to do it. We will move on to the next form, and that's continue to import and qualify pollutant concentrations, because we've done everything we need to do on this form. And we are going to assign the pollutant, which the toolbox has already done for me, and the units. My units for my PM 2.5 data are micrograms per cubic meter. So I select that and click on the K button. We're going to run an update query, say yes. And we're going to update 334 rows, which matches what's in my logbook. Yay, yes. And now, so the accepted range for this PM 2.5 by default is -10 to 999. I did my homework and I researched my MDL data and found out that for my sampler, my minimum is not -10, it's actually 2. So I need to change this to 2. And I know from my manual that anything greater than 975 is an error in my particular data. So I'm going to change this to 975. And then I'm going to display the data that's outside of this range. Let's see what happens. So in this particular example, I got some data that's somewhat below my minimum of 2. And then I've got a whole bunch of data that's way far above. So I scroll through just to look, and I've got a total of 39 records that are outside of the range. So I can close that, and I'm going to go ahead and tell the toolbox to flag all of that data. So I do that by closing the window and then clicking on qualify these monitoring data based on these outer range concentrations. So I'm going to do that. And again, it reminds me, I'm just flagging these. I'm not invalidating them. Make sure you also complete the final validation step. I say, okay, thanks. I'll remember to do that. I click OK. And it says I'm going to do an update query. I say yes. And I'm going to update 39 rows. So I write down in my logbook that I'm flagging 39 rows that are outside of my acceptable range, up 2 to 975 micrograms per cubic meter. So I say yes. And my consecutive measurement difference, remember by default, it's three times the minimum. So my old minimum before it changes was 10. So it's a 30. So I'm going to qualify just based on 30 and see what happens. And it says I'm going to run an update query. I say yes. And it says 7 rows. So I write down in my logbook that I flagged 7 rows with consecutive measurement differences of greater than 30 micrograms per cubic meter. Just for fun, I want to change this to 6 and see what happens. So I'm going to do 3 times 2 and change this to 6 just for fun. See what happens. See how many the records I get. I'm going to flag. Let's just try it. Let's try it again and see. So it says update query, and this time it's going to update 41 rows. So I say, okay, go ahead and flag those. So yes. And then I'm going to move on to duplicate concentrations. So let's see if there's any duplicate concentrations. Let's go ahead and click on this button. And it says there's a total of 98 records with duplicates. So I say, okay, go ahead and flag those for me. And now I'm just curious. I just want to take a look at all of my flags. So I can use this. I can use this green button if I want to take a look at all of my different flags, or I can also use the inspect data verification table button. So I'm going to go ahead and do that just because I want to see all my flags so far. So there's multiple flags sometimes, and that's totally fine. So you'll see sometimes it flagged for HD30, and sometimes it flagged for HD6. And then it's got some duplicates it flagged for, some ranges it flagged for. So I just was curious. So I can close that window and move on. So I'm going to flag my data based on QC checks. And there's actually no failing QC checks because there's no flags here in the qualifiers. So there's nothing I need to flag based on my QC checks. So I can move on to step L3. And in this particular case, I have something written in my field logbook that what happened was there was a tape error, and I need to flag data based on that tape error. So I'm going to look at my database logbook and flag some additional data when I find it based on what's in my logbook. So in my logbook, it says from 1/7/2015 at 2 a.m. to 1/10/2015 at 6 a.m. I know there was a tape error, and I want to flag that data. So I'm gonna select that range. So if I start by clicking on this drop down, it shows me the range. And if I start typing in, then I can go closer to where I want to go. So if I type in 1/7, then it goes down on that list to right where I want to be. So 1/7 at 2 a.m. is where I want to start. And I want to finish at 1:10 at 6 a.m. So I'm going to click on the drop down again and do 1:10 at 6 a.m. And then it gives me the opportunity of looking at that data first. So let's look at it. And you'll notice that the toolbox has already flagged this data. So you'll notice a flag of duplicate that's already been flagged. And if you scroll down, you'll notice sometimes there's other flags like the HD30 and the R flag. So I don't really need to flag this data again, but I'm going to go ahead and do it anyways, just because I want to make sure that I know that it matches my database, my field logbook. So I'm going to know exactly when that tape error started and when it finished. So I'm going to go ahead and add another flag to this data. And it's totally fine to have multiple flags for your data. So I'm going to tell the toolbox to go ahead and flag that data. So I close the screen and I click on the qualify data within the state time range button. And it says the reminder that it's just flagging the data, not invalidating. I say okay. And I'm going to run an update query. I say yes. And I'm going to update 77 rows. So I write down in my logbook that I flagged an additional, well, the same 77 rows due to the tape error. And I say yes. And the flag that the toolbox adds for this is called a Q1. So it adds a Q1 flag to this. So I know when I see the Q1 flag, that data was due to the tape error. So I say yes. And let's inspect it. So let's scroll down and make sure everything looks good and it's ready to archive. So here's the new flag, Q1. So everything is looking good to me. I don't see anything strange. I'm ready to archive my data, move it into its permanent home. So let's go ahead and transfer the data to the archive table button. And I'm going to say yes on the append query. 334 rows matches what's in my database logbook. I say yes. And let's take a look at the data in the archive table. So remember, I said that the archive table includes all of your data that you've ever archived. So the first thing I see is my ozone data, because I just archived that. So if I want to see my PM 2.5 data, scroll down. Scroll down until I get to my PM 2.5 data. So here's my PM 2.5 data. And that looks good. Nothing strange about the data that I can tell. Everything looks good and nice and archived. So we can go ahead and close that window. And we now successfully archived both our ozone data and our PM 2.5 data from those two files. So we want to clear out the pipeline and get ready for our next import. So the first thing we do is click on the Clear Data Verification Table button. And you're going to run a delete query. I say yes. I'm going to get rid of those rows since I already archived the data. So I'm going to move them out of the verification table by clicking yes. And now I can close forms and clear data import table. So I am done working with the toolbox for today. So I click on this first button, that's the close forms and clear data import table. So I click on that button and that clears out the import table and gets ready for my next import into the toolbox. And it tells me I'm going to delete this. Are you sure you want me to do that? I say, yes, I do. I already archived the data. Okay. And that takes me back to the fast track form in Toolbox.